I am 90 years old now. 90 years. That is a very long time to live. Long enough to watch the world change again and again. Long enough to see horses disappear from the roads and computers appear in every home. Long enough to hold newborn babies in my arms and later watch them become grandparents themselves. But today, as I sit alone in this old wooden chair beside my living room window, none of those years seem to matter, because the one thing I never imagined would happen has become my daily reality. My children barely speak to me anymore. Every morning, I wake up before sunrise. Old people do that. Sleep comes lightly when you reach this age. The birds outside begin singing, and I slowly open my eyes. For a few moments, I forget how quiet my life has become. Then reality returns. The house is silent. No footsteps. No laughter. No voices calling, "Good morning, Mom." Just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy. The kind that sits beside you like an unwanted visitor. I make my bed carefully because nobody else will do it. I walk slowly to the kitchen and prepare breakfast for one person. Just one. Sometimes I make too much coffee by accident. After all, for most of my life, I was making breakfast for a family. I was a mother. That was my greatest title. Not employee, not homeowner, not anything else. Mother. For decades, my days revolved around my children. I woke up early to prepare their lunches. I stayed awake late when they were sick. I attended school plays, soccer games, graduations, and birthday parties. I cheered for them when they succeeded. I cried with them when they failed. I worried about them every single day. That is what mothers do. We give pieces of our hearts away, and we never ask for them back. I remember the first time I held my oldest son. The nurse placed him in my arms, and suddenly the world felt different. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine. His eyes were closed. His breathing was soft. In that moment, I silently promised him something. I promised that I would always be there, no matter what, and I kept that promise. For years. For decades. When he was afraid of thunderstorms, I sat beside his bed. When he struggled in school, I helped him study. When he got his heart broken for the first time, I listened to him cry. When he became a father himself, I was there celebrating beside him. I did the same for all my children. I gave them everything I could. Not because I expected rewards. Not because I wanted praise. I did it because I loved them. That is what parents do. We spend our youth building lives for our children. We sacrifice things nobody sees. The vacations we never took, the dreams we postponed, the sleep we lost, the worries we carried, the tears we hid. We gladly pay those prices because our children are worth it. At least, that is what we believe. For many years, our home was full of life. Every room had a purpose. Every chair was occupied. Every dinner table conversation was noisy. Sometimes too noisy. Back then, I would joke that I wished for a little peace and quiet. Funny how life works. Now I would give anything to hear that noise again. I would give anything to hear the sound of my children running through the hallway. Anything to hear arguments about who got the bigger piece of cake. Anything to hear someone shout, "Mom!" Back then, I thought those moments would last forever. I was wrong. Nothing lasts forever. Children grow up. They build their own lives. They move away. That part is natural. That part is supposed to happen. I never expected them to stay children. I wanted them to grow. I wanted them to succeed. And they did. My children became successful adults. They have careers. They have homes. They have families. They have busy schedules. I am proud of them. Very proud. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The phone calls became shorter. Then less frequent. Then rare. Birthdays became text messages. Holiday visits became excuses. Family gatherings became difficult to organize. Everyone seemed busy. Too busy. At first, I understood. Life is demanding. People have responsibilities. I told myself not to take it personally. Weeks became months. Months became years. And gradually I found myself waiting. Always waiting. Waiting for a phone call. Waiting for a visit. Waiting for a knock on the door. Waiting for someone to remember that I am still here. Do you know what loneliness feels like at 90? It is different from the loneliness younger people experience. When you are young, loneliness feels temporary. You believe tomorrow might bring something new. At 90, loneliness feels heavier. Because time becomes precious. You become aware that every birthday matters. Every Christmas matters. Every conversation matters. You begin realizing that there may not be many opportunities left. That realization changes everything. Last winter, I fell in my kitchen. Nothing serious. At least that is what I told everyone. But as I lay on the floor, unable to stand for nearly an hour, a thought entered my mind. A painful thought. What if nobody notices if something happens to me? What if days pass before someone checks on me? I hated myself for thinking that. But the thought was real. And once a thought like that enters your heart, it is difficult to remove. Eventually, I managed to get up. I brushed myself off. I smiled. I pretended everything was fine. Old people become very good at pretending. We pretend we are not lonely. We pretend we are not hurt. We pretend we understand. We pretend because we do not want to become burdens. That word, burden. Many elderly people fear it more than death itself. We spend our entire lives helping others. Then one day we need help ourselves. And suddenly we worry that people see us differently. As problems, as obligations, as responsibilities, instead of parents, instead of people, instead of human beings. One afternoon, I found an old photo album. Dust covered the edges. The pages were worn from years of use. I sat beside the window and slowly turned each page. There they were, my children. Smiling, laughing, growing, birthday cakes, school pictures, family vacations, Christmas mornings, hundreds of memories frozen in time. I smiled as I looked at those photographs. Then, unexpectedly, tears filled my eyes, not because the memories were sad, but because they were beautiful, and because beauty can sometimes hurt when it feels far away. I stared at one particular photograph for a long time. It showed all my children gathered around me on Mother's Day. They were hugging me, smiling, holding handmade cards. The youngest one had written something in crooked handwriting. "I love you forever, Mom. Forever." Such a powerful word. Children mean it when they say it. At least they do at the time. And maybe they still mean it deep inside. Maybe life simply gets in the way. Maybe responsibilities become overwhelming. Maybe people assume there will always be more time. But time is the one thing nobody can guarantee, not even for a 90-year-old mother sitting alone beside a window. As the sun began setting that evening, golden light filled the room. I closed the photo album gently. I looked around the quiet house. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to ask a question I had been avoiding. A question that hurt more than any physical pain. Why are my children ignoring me? Had I done something wrong? Had I failed somehow? Or was this simply what growing old looks like? I did not know the answer. But I knew one thing. The story was far from over. Because sometimes the deepest lessons about love, family, regret, and forgiveness arrive when we least expect them. And what happened next would change everything. The next morning began like most mornings do when you are 90 years old. Slowly, carefully, quietly. The sunlight slipped through the curtains and painted soft golden lines across my bedroom wall. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling for a few moments before sitting up. My joints ached, as they often do now. Every movement required a little more effort than it used to. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked toward the small table beside me. There was my reading lamp, my glasses, a framed photograph of my family, and my phone. That phone had become one of the most important objects in my life, not because I used it often, but because I hoped it would ring. Every day, I picked it up and checked the screen. Nothing. No missed calls. No messages. No notifications. I placed it back down and tried to ignore the disappointment that settled into my chest. Maybe later. I whispered to myself. I had become very good at saying those words. Maybe later. Maybe this afternoon. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. Hope can be a wonderful thing. But sometimes hope becomes painful when it remains unanswered for too long. I slowly made my way to the kitchen and prepared breakfast. A single piece of toast, a boiled egg, a cup of coffee. As I sat at the table, my eyes wandered toward the empty chairs surrounding me. There had been a time when every seat was occupied. Mornings used to be chaotic. One child searching for a missing shoe, another complaining about homework, someone spilling orange juice, someone else laughing uncontrollably. Back then, I often dreamed about having a peaceful breakfast. Now peace was all I had, and it no longer felt peaceful. It felt lonely. After breakfast, I decided to clean the living room. Keeping busy helps pass the time. That is another lesson old people learn. If you stop moving, your thoughts start talking. And sometimes your thoughts are not kind. As I dusted the shelves, I noticed a birthday card tucked behind a picture frame. It was from 3 years ago. One of my daughters had mailed it. The message inside was sweet. "Happy birthday, Mom. Love you always." I smiled. Then I looked at the date. 3 years. 3 years since I had last seen her in person. How does that happen? How do years disappear so quickly? When my children were young, 3 years felt like forever. A child could grow so much in 3 years. Learn so much, change so much. But at 93 years feels like the blink of an eye. And every one of those years matters. Around noon, I sat by the window again. That had become my favorite place in the house. The chair beside the window. From there, I could watch the world continue moving. Cars passing, neighbors walking their dogs, children riding bicycles. Life happening. Sometimes I imagined every passing car might stop in front of my house. Maybe one of my children would step out. Maybe one of my grandchildren. Maybe they would surprise me. Maybe they would say, "We missed you." Maybe they would stay for coffee. Maybe we would laugh together like we used to. Those thoughts always brought a smile to my face, at least for a little while. That afternoon, I remembered something important. My oldest son's birthday was approaching. In 3 days. I had already purchased a card weeks earlier. The card sat neatly on my desk waiting to be mailed. I opened it again and read what I had written. My handwriting was shakier now than it used to be. But every word came straight from my heart. "Happy birthday, my son. I hope this year brings you happiness, health, and peace. I am proud of the man you have become. Love always, Mom." Simple words, but sincere. I wondered if he would read them carefully. I wondered if he would smile. I wondered if he would call. The thought stayed with me all day. By evening, I found myself looking at the phone more often than usual. Perhaps he might call early. Perhaps he had been thinking about me. Perhaps he suddenly realized how long it had been. The phone remained silent. I tried not to let it bother me. I turned on the television. Nothing interesting. I opened a book. Couldn't focus. I made tea. Forgot to drink it while it was still hot. My mind kept returning to the same question. When did we become strangers? Not complete strangers, of course. We still knew each other's names. We still exchanged holiday greetings. But something important had faded. The closeness, the connection, the feeling of belonging in each other's daily lives. Late that night, I couldn't sleep. So I walked into the hallway and looked at the family photographs hanging on the wall. There was one picture from a camping trip many years ago. My children were teenagers then. We didn't have much money, but we had each other. I remembered sitting around a campfire that evening. The stars above us, the laughter, the stories. One of my sons had looked at me and said something I never forgot. "Mom, when I'm grown up, I'm going to take care of you forever." I know he meant it. I truly do. Children say things like that because their hearts are pure. Life simply changes people. Responsibilities pile up, careers demand attention. Bills need paying, children need raising. Time becomes scarce, and somehow, without intending to, people begin neglecting the relationships that once meant everything. The next morning, I woke with a strange feeling. A feeling that today might be different. I can't explain why. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was wishful thinking. Maybe it was simply the human heart refusing to give up. After breakfast, I sat beside the phone, not literally waiting. At least that is what I told myself. But deep down, I was waiting. Every small sound made me glance toward it. A car door closing, the television changing volume, the refrigerator humming. Each sound briefly tricked my heart into believing the phone was ringing. It never was. Hours passed. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. Still nothing. Finally, I decided to call my son myself. My hand trembled slightly as I entered his number. I hesitated before pressing the final button. Part of me worried about bothering him. Imagine that. A mother afraid of bothering her own child. Eventually, I gathered the courage and made the call. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5. Then voicemail. His cheerful recorded voice filled my ear. "Hi, you've reached me. Leave a message and I'll call you back." I waited for the beep. Suddenly, I didn't know what to say. 1,000 emotions crowded into my throat. Finally, I spoke. "Hello, sweetheart. It's Mom. I was just thinking about you. I hope you're doing well. No rush. Just wanted to hear your voice. Love you." I hung up. And then I waited. An hour. 2 hours, the entire evening. No return call. No text message. Nothing. I told myself he was busy. I told myself not to overreact. I told myself all the reasonable things people say. But deep inside, something hurt. Not anger. Not resentment. Just sadness. The kind of sadness that arrives quietly. The kind that sits beside you without speaking. That night, I sat alone in the darkness of my living room. The television was off. The house was silent. The only light came from the moon shining through the window. I stared at my phone resting on the table. Such a small object, yet it carried so much emotional weight. One phone call, that was all I wanted. Not money, not gifts, not grand gestures. Just a conversation. Just 10 minutes. Just the sound of my child's voice asking how I was doing. As the clock approached midnight, I finally accepted that the call was not coming. At least not tonight. I turned off the lamp and prepared for bed. But before leaving the room, I glanced one last time at the phone. And for a brief moment, I felt something I had been trying very hard not to feel. Invisible, not unloved, because I still believed my children loved me. But forgotten, and sometimes being forgotten hurts almost as much as being unloved. As I climbed into bed, tears gathered in my eyes. Not dramatic tears, not loud sobbing, just quiet tears sliding down an old face that had seen 90 years of joy, sacrifice, hope, and heartbreak. I wiped them away and whispered a prayer. Not for myself. For my children, I prayed they were healthy, safe, happy, because that is what mothers do. Even when their hearts are breaking, even when the phone never rings, even when the call they waited for never comes, and as sleep slowly carried me away, I had no idea that a discovery hidden inside an old wooden box would soon reveal a truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. A few days after the phone call that never came, I found myself thinking about the past more than usual. At 90 years old, memories become companions. Some arrive unexpectedly. Some stay only for a moment. Others settle beside you and refuse to leave. That morning, rain tapped softly against my windows. Gray clouds covered the sky, and the entire house felt darker than normal. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in my usual chair by the window. The silence felt heavier than usual. Perhaps it was because my son's birthday had passed. I had mailed the card. I knew it had been delivered. The postal tracking confirmed it. But there had been no phone call, no message, not even a simple "thank you." I tried not to dwell on it. I truly did. But some disappointments are difficult to ignore, especially when they come from the people you love most. To distract myself, I decided to clean parts of the house I had been avoiding for years. The attic was one of those places. Old houses collect memories, boxes, photographs, forgotten treasures, pieces of life stored away and rarely touched. After finishing my coffee, I slowly climbed the attic stairs. Each step demanded caution. My balance was not what it once had been. When I finally reached the top, I switched on the light. Dust danced through the air. The attic smelled like old wood and forgotten years. Boxes lined the walls. Some were labeled. Others were not. For a few moments, I simply stood there looking around. Every box represented a chapter of life. A different season. A different story. I began sorting through them one by one. Christmas decorations, old blankets, school projects, family keepsakes. As I worked, memories flooded back. I found a handmade Mother's Day card created by my youngest daughter when she was 7 years old. The paper was faded now, the corners bent with age, but the words inside remained clear. "You are the best mommy in the whole world." I smiled. Then I carefully placed it aside. Nearby, I found an old baseball glove that belonged to one of my sons. The leather was cracked from years of use. Immediately, I remembered countless afternoons sitting on metal bleachers under the hot summer sun, cheering, clapping, supporting, being there. Always being there. I continued searching. Hours passed. Then, tucked into the far corner behind several large storage containers, I noticed something unusual. A small wooden box. I didn't remember seeing it before. The box was old, very old. Dust covered the lid. There was no label. No markings. Nothing to identify what was inside. Curious, I carried it downstairs. The box wasn't heavy, but somehow it felt important. I sat at the dining room table and carefully opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Letters, some sealed, some already opened. My heart skipped slightly. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to my late husband, the love of my life, the man who had been gone for nearly 12 years. For a long moment, I simply stared. I had not expected this. His handwriting brought back a wave of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Love, grief, comfort, longing. I carefully picked up the first envelope. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The letter had been written decades earlier, back when our children were still young. I began reading. The words were simple, honest, beautiful. He wrote about family, about love, about how proud he was of our children, about how grateful he felt for the life we had built together. Tears filled my eyes. I could almost hear his voice. I read another letter, then another, and another. Each one revealed pieces of the man I had loved for more than 60 years. His hopes, his dreams, his worries, his devotion to our family. Then I found something unexpected. A bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Unlike the others, these envelopes had names written on them. The names of our children, one letter for each child. My heart began beating faster. I untied the ribbon carefully. The first envelope was addressed to my oldest son, the second to my daughter, then another son, then my youngest daughter. Every child had a letter. I stared at them for several moments. I had never seen these before. I didn't know they existed. Why had my husband written them? Why had he hidden them? I chose one and began reading. The letter wasn't meant for me, but it was impossible not to look. Inside, my husband had written a personal message to our son. He spoke about responsibility, kindness, family, and then one particular passage caught my attention. If there ever comes a day when your mother grows old and needs you, remember everything she has done for you. Remember the sleepless nights. Remember the sacrifices. Remember the love she gave freely. One day, she may need your time more than your money. Give it generously. I stopped reading. A lump formed in my throat. My eyes blurred with tears. I picked up another letter. The message was different, but the theme remained the same: family, gratitude, love, presence. One sentence stood out. Never assume there will always be another visit, another holiday, another conversation. Time is precious, especially with the people you love. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I leaned back in my chair. My husband had written these letters many years ago, long before he became sick, long before he passed away, long before any of us imagined what the future would look like. Yet somehow his words felt as if they had been written yesterday. I continued reading. Each letter carried wisdom, gentleness, and a reminder of what truly mattered: Family, not possessions, not careers, not achievements. Family. The people who love you before success arrives and remain when success leaves. As I reached the final letter, I noticed something folded beneath the others. A single sheet of paper. This one was addressed to me. My breath caught. Slowly, I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. My dear love, if you are reading this, then I am no longer beside you. But please know that my love has never left. You will probably spend some days feeling lonely. You may even wonder if people still need you. Do not believe those thoughts. You have been the heart of this family since the day it began. Everything good we built started with your love. And if our children ever become distracted by life, do not assume it means they love you less. People become busy. People become overwhelmed. Sometimes they forget to show what they feel. But a mother's influence never disappears. It lives inside her children forever. I stopped reading. The tears came freely now, not because the letter was sad, but because it felt like hearing his voice again. After 12 years, 12 long years, for a while I simply sat there holding the letter, remembering, missing him, loving him. The rain outside continued falling, softly, steadily, almost as if the world itself was pausing to listen. Then a thought entered my mind, a surprising thought. What if my children weren't ignoring me because they didn't care? What if something else was happening? What if they were trapped inside the endless demands of modern life? What if they believed there would always be more time? What if they had no idea how lonely I felt? The possibility didn't erase my pain, but it changed something. It shifted my perspective. Perhaps my children weren't intentionally hurting me. Perhaps they simply didn't realize the impact of their absence. Perhaps they needed a reminder, not of guilt, not of obligation, but of connection, of family, of love. That evening, I carefully placed all the letters back into the wooden box, except one. My husband's letter to me remained beside my chair. I planned to read it many more times. As darkness settled outside, I found myself feeling something I had not felt in months. Hope, small, fragile, but real. For the first time, I began wondering whether this story might have a different ending than I expected. Whether relationships could still be repaired, whether hearts could still reconnect, whether love, buried beneath years of distance and business, could find its way back home. What I did not know was that only a few days later, an unexpected visitor would arrive at my front door carrying news that would leave me speechless. And that visitor would change everything. The days after discovering the letters felt different, not dramatically different. My house was still quiet. The phone still spent long hours without ringing. I still ate most of my meals alone. But something inside me had changed. The letters my husband left behind had given me a small measure of peace. Whenever loneliness became overwhelming, I would sit in my favorite chair and read his words again. Each sentence felt like a warm hand resting gently on my shoulder. Each paragraph reminded me that I was not defined by how often my phone rang or how many visitors came through my front door. I was still a mother, still a person, still someone whose life had mattered. And yet, despite that comfort, there were moments when the loneliness returned. One particular Thursday afternoon, I found myself staring out the window once again. Rain had finally disappeared, replaced by bright sunshine. Children were playing down the street. Neighbors were mowing their lawns. Life seemed busy everywhere except inside my house. I glanced at the clock. 3 o'clock. The quietest time of day. Too late for breakfast. Too early for dinner. Just enough time for memories to wander freely through an aging mind. I had just picked up my husband's letter when I heard something unusual. A knock. At first, I thought I imagined it. Visitors were rare these days. Very rare. Then came a second knock, firm, real. My heart immediately began beating faster. I carefully stood from my chair and made my way toward the front door. Who could it be? A delivery driver. A neighbor. Someone selling something. As I approached the door, I felt a strange mixture of curiosity and nervousness. When you live alone long enough, unexpected visitors become major events. I opened the door slowly, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Standing on my porch was a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, maybe 26. She had kind eyes, dark hair, and a familiar smile, a very familiar smile. It took only a few seconds for recognition to arrive. She was my granddaughter, Emily. I hadn't seen her in nearly 4 years. "Grandma," she said softly. The moment I heard her voice, my eyes filled with tears. Not because I was sad, because I was overwhelmed. Because after so much silence, hearing a family member standing at my door felt almost unreal. "Emily," I whispered. She smiled. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. The hug lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like healing, the kind of healing that words cannot fully describe. When she finally stepped back, she noticed the tears on my face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Sorry for what?" I asked. Her eyes lowered toward the porch floor. "For staying away so long." The honesty in her voice touched me deeply. I invited her inside. We sat together in the living room, the same living room where I had spent countless hours alone. Suddenly it felt alive again. We talked for nearly an hour. At first the conversation focused on simple things: her work, her apartment, her friends, daily life. But eventually, the discussion moved toward more personal territory. She looked around the room. The photographs, the family pictures, the memories covering every wall. Then she asked a question. "Grandma, are you lonely?" The room became very quiet. I could have lied. Many older people do. We often protect others from uncomfortable truths. We say we're fine. We say everything is okay. We pretend. But something about her expression made honesty feel necessary, so I answered. "Yes," I said softly. "Sometimes I am." Emily nodded, slowly, thoughtfully, almost as though she had expected the answer. Then something surprising happened. Tears appeared in her eyes. "Grandma," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't know. Those 4 words struck me deeply. I didn't know. For months, maybe years, I had assumed my family understood how I felt. I assumed they knew about the long quiet days, the empty holidays, the waiting, the loneliness. But perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they truly had no idea. Emily reached into her purse and removed her phone. Then she showed me something. A family group chat, messages from relatives, pictures, updates, conversations, hundreds of interactions. I recognized names immediately. My children, my grandchildren, family members staying connected through technology. And yet I was not part of it, not intentionally excluded, simply forgotten, a detail overlooked, a name never added. A small mistake that grew larger over time. Emily explained. Everyone assumed someone else was checking on me. Everyone believed someone else had called recently. Everyone thought someone else had visited. The responsibility had become shared, and because it belonged to everyone, it ended up belonging to no one. No cruelty. No bad intentions, just assumptions. Dangerous assumptions. The kind that slowly create distance between people who love one another. For several moments, neither of us spoke. I found myself reflecting on how easily relationships can drift apart. Not through hatred, not through conflict, but through neglect. Small moments missed, calls post-delayed, until eventually months become years. Emily finally broke the silence. "I think they love you more than you realize." I smiled sadly. "Maybe." "No," she said firmly. "I know they do." Her confidence surprised me. Then she explained something that changed my perspective even further. Several months earlier, my oldest son had experienced serious stress at work. Another daughter was caring for a husband recovering from surgery. One grandchild had been struggling emotionally after a difficult breakup. Another family member had moved across the country. Everyone was carrying burdens. Everyone was distracted. Everyone was trying to survive their own challenges. None of that excused the absence. But it helped explain it. Life had pulled everyone in different directions. And somehow, without meaning to, they had lost sight of someone who needed them. Me. As the afternoon continued, Emily helped me connect pieces of a puzzle I had been staring at for years. Perhaps my family had not stopped loving me. Perhaps they had simply stopped paying attention. There is a difference. A very important difference. Before leaving, Emily walked around the house with me. We looked through old photographs, shared stories, laughed about memories. For the first time in a very long while, the house echoed with conversation. The walls seemed happier. The rooms felt warmer. The silence had been interrupted, and I realized how much I missed that feeling. As the evening sun began setting, Emily prepared to leave. But before stepping outside, she turned toward me. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." She hesitated, then smiled. "What would you say if everyone came for dinner next Sunday?" I blinked. Surely I had misunderstood. "Everyone," she nodded. "The whole family." For a moment I couldn't find words. The possibility seemed too wonderful, too unexpected, too fragile to believe. I began slowly, then my voice broke. "I would say that sounds perfect." Emily hugged me one more time. Then she walked toward her car. As I stood in the doorway watching her leave, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not for the past, not for memories, for the future, for something that had not happened yet. Something that still might. As darkness settled over the neighborhood that evening, I sat in my chair and looked around the room. Everything appeared the same. The furniture, the photographs, the walls. Yet somehow everything felt different, because hope had returned. Real hope. Not the kind built on wishful thinking. The kind built on possibility. The kind built on connection. The kind built on love. And deep inside, I sensed that next Sunday would bring answers I had been waiting years to hear. What I did not know was that family dinner would reveal a heartbreaking truth, a powerful apology, and an emotional moment that would leave not a single dry eye in the room. The story was about to reach the moment that would change all of our lives forever. The week leading up to Sunday felt longer than any week I could remember. At 90 years old, time usually moves quickly. Days blend together. Mornings become afternoons, afternoons become evenings, and before you know it, another week has passed. But this week was different. Every day felt important. Every sunrise carried anticipation. Every night ended with hope. For the first time in years, I found myself planning something special. A family dinner. Not a holiday, not a funeral, not an emergency. Just a family gathering. The kind we used to have all the time. The kind I thought might never happen again. Monday passed. Then Tuesday. Then Wednesday. Each morning I wondered if everyone would actually come. Part of me was excited. Another part was afraid. What if plans changed? What if work became too busy? What if someone canceled? After so many disappointments, hope can feel risky. When you've been hurt enough times, you begin protecting your heart from future pain. But despite those fears, I kept preparing. On Thursday, I wrote a grocery list. On Friday, I cleaned every room in the house. I dusted shelves that nobody would probably notice. I polished the dining table. I arranged family photographs neatly around the living room. I even baked my famous apple pie. The same recipe my children loved when they were young. The smell filled the house. For a moment, it felt like stepping back in time. I could almost hear little feet running through the hallway, almost hear voices asking, "Is the pie ready yet?" Memories surrounded me everywhere. But this time, the memories didn't make me sad. They made me smile. Saturday night, I barely slept. I kept imagining what Sunday might look like. Would the conversations feel awkward? Would everyone seem distant? Had too much time passed? Or would we somehow find our way back to each other? The answers would arrive soon enough. Finally, Sunday came. I woke before sunrise. The sky outside was still dark, yet I was already wide awake. I spent the morning preparing food. Slowly, carefully. My hands were older now. My movements slower, but my heart felt young. By noon, everything was ready. The dining table was set. Extra chairs had been arranged. Food covered nearly every available surface in the kitchen. Looking around, I suddenly realized something. The house hadn't looked this alive in years. Then came the waiting, the hardest part. At 1 o'clock, I glanced at the clock, then again at 1:15, then 1:30. Every sound outside captured my attention. Every passing car made my heart jump. Finally, at exactly 2 o'clock, I heard a car door close. Then another. Then another. I walked toward the front window, and there they were. My family, my children, my grandchildren, walking toward the house. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. After years of loneliness, years of wondering, years of waiting, they were here. Actually here. Tears immediately filled my eyes. The front door opened, and suddenly the house exploded with life. Voices, laughter, footsteps, conversations, energy. Beautiful, wonderful noise. The kind of noise I had missed every single day. My oldest son entered first. The same little boy I once carried in my arms, now a grandfather himself. Without saying a word, he walked directly toward me. Then he hugged me tightly, longer than he ever had before. When he finally stepped back, tears were running down his face. "I am so sorry, Mom." The room became silent. Every conversation stopped. Every person listened. My son looked at me with eyes full of regret. I thought there would always be more time. His voice trembled. I kept putting things off. Work, responsibilities, problems. I always told myself I'd visit next week. He wiped his eyes. Then next week became next month. The honesty in his words touched everyone, including me. One by one, others began speaking. My daughter apologized. Then another son. Then grandchildren. The stories were surprisingly similar. Nobody had stopped loving me. Nobody had intentionally abandoned me. Instead, they had allowed life to become louder than family. Careers demanded attention. Children required care. Stress consumed energy. Days disappeared. And while everyone focused on urgent matters, they neglected something important. Someone important. Me. Listening to them, I realized something powerful. Distance doesn't always happen because love disappears. Sometimes distance happens because attention disappears. Love remains, but it becomes buried beneath distractions. And unless someone uncovers it, relationships slowly fade. Then my granddaughter, Emily, spoke. Everyone turned toward her. "If I hadn't visited Grandma that day," she said softly, "we might still believe everything was fine." Nobody argued, because everyone knew she was right. Sometimes families need someone brave enough to notice what others have missed. Someone willing to ask difficult questions. Someone willing to reconnect broken threads. Emily had become that person. The afternoon continued. Stories filled the house. Old memories resurfaced. Laughter echoed through every room. For hours, nobody looked at phones. Nobody rushed away. Nobody seemed distracted. Instead, they were present. Completely present. And that made all the difference. At one point, my youngest grandson sat beside me. He couldn't have been older than 12. He looked at me seriously and asked a simple question. "Grandma, were you really lonely?" Children have a way of asking the questions adults avoid. I smiled gently. "Sometimes." His face fell. Then he wrapped his arms around me. A simple hug. Yet one of the most meaningful moments of the entire day. Because children understand something adults often forget. Time is love. Attention is love. Presence is love. As evening approached, everyone gathered around the dining table. Every chair was occupied. Just like old times. Looking around the table, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Not because my family was perfect. We weren't. Not because mistakes hadn't been made. They had. But because we were together. And togetherness is powerful. Especially after separation. During dinner, I stood slowly from my chair. The room quieted. Everyone looked toward me. For a moment, I simply observed the faces around the table. Faces I loved. Faces I had missed. Faces that represented my greatest achievement in life. Not money. Not success. Family. Then I spoke. "My dear family, I need you to know something." The room remained silent. "I forgive all of you." Several people immediately began crying, including me. I continued. "Not because what happened didn't hurt." I paused. "It did hurt. Very much. But carrying pain for years only creates more pain. I looked around the room, and we don't know how much time any of us have left. Those words settled heavily over everyone, because they were true. Life offers no guarantees. Not for 90-year-olds. Not for 40-year-olds. Not for anyone. I don't want regrets, I said softly. I want memories. The tears became impossible to stop. People reached across the table, holding hands, sharing tissues, smiling through tears, healing. For the first time in years, the family felt connected again. Not because problems disappeared, not because life suddenly became easy, but because everyone remembered what mattered, each other. As darkness settled outside, nobody wanted to leave. Conversations continued, stories continued, love continued. Eventually, however, goodbyes became necessary. One by one, family members hugged me. But this time something was different. Promises were made, specific promises, weekly calls, monthly visits, family dinners, real commitments, not vague intentions, not someday, actual plans. As the final car disappeared down the street, I stood quietly on my porch. The night air felt cool, peaceful, beautiful. The house would become quiet again. Of course it would. That was inevitable. But it would never feel quite the same, because now I knew something I hadn't fully understood before. My children had never stopped loving me. They had simply lost sight of what mattered. And thankfully, before it was too late, they found their way back. As I returned inside, I noticed something sitting on the dining table, a handwritten note. Someone had left it behind. I unfolded it carefully. The message was short, only 6 words. But they meant everything. "We're coming back next Sunday," I smiled, then laughed, then cried again. Not tears of sadness, not tears of loneliness, tears of gratitude. Because after years of silence, the house was no longer waiting for a phone call. It was waiting for family. And that changed everything. As I sit here today, looking out the same window where I spent so many lonely afternoons, I find myself thinking about everything that has happened. The silence, the waiting, the unanswered phone calls, the empty holidays, the tears nobody saw, the questions I asked myself over and over again. Why are my children ignoring me? Do they still care? Did I do something wrong? Have I become invisible? For a long time, I believed I might never know the answers. But life has a strange way of teaching us important lessons when we least expect them. What I learned changed my heart. And perhaps it can change yours too. The truth is that loneliness is one of the greatest hidden struggles of old age. Many elderly people never talk about it. They smile when family visits. They say they are fine. They tell everyone not to worry. But behind closed doors, many sit alone for hours, days, sometimes weeks, waiting for a phone call, waiting for a visit, waiting for someone to remember them. Not because they need money, not because they need gifts, but because they need connection. Human beings were never meant to live without connection. We are created for relationships, for conversations, for shared laughter, for companionship, for love. When those things disappear, something inside us begins to ache. And the difficult part is that loneliness often hides itself well. An elderly parent may never tell their children how lonely they feel. They don't want to create guilt. They don't want to become a burden. They don't want to sound needy, so they stay quiet, and the silence grows. Many children believe their parents are doing fine because their parents never complain. But sometimes the absence of complaints does not mean the absence of pain. Sometimes it means the pain has been carried alone for too long. If there is one message I hope every son and daughter hears, it is this: your parents do not need perfection. They need presence. They do not expect you to solve every problem. They simply want to know they still matter. A 5-minute phone call can brighten an entire week. A short visit can create a memory that lasts for months. A simple text message can remind an aging parent that they have not been forgotten. These gestures may seem small to you, but they can mean everything to someone who spends most of their days alone. The older I become, the more I realize that life moves faster than anyone expects. When we are young, we believe time is unlimited. We postpone visits, delay conversations, cancel plans, promise ourselves we will reconnect later, next week, next month, next year, but eventually later becomes too late. One day, the phone number you always meant to call will no longer answer. One day, the chair at the family table will be empty. One day, the opportunity to say, "I love you," will disappear forever, and no amount of success can undo that loss. No promotion, no achievement. Nothing can replace time that was never shared. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming there will always be another chance. Another birthday, another Christmas, another family dinner, another conversation. The truth is that nobody knows how many chances remain, not one of us. Life offers no guarantees. That reality is not meant to create fear. It is meant to create appreciation. Appreciation for today. Appreciation for the people who are still here. Appreciation for the moments we often take for granted. As I look back over 90 years, I can honestly say that the most valuable parts of my life were never the things I owned. They were the people I loved. The laughter around the dinner table, the bedtime stories, the family vacations, the hugs, the conversations, the ordinary moments that seemed unimportant at the time. Those ordinary moments became extraordinary memories, and memories become treasures as we grow older. I have also learned something important about forgiveness. When my family drifted away, I could have chosen bitterness. I could have carried anger. I could have focused on every missed phone call and every forgotten visit. But bitterness would not have healed my heart. It would only have wounded it further. Forgiveness does not erase pain. It simply prevents pain from controlling the future. When we forgive, we create space for healing. We create space for understanding. We create space for love to return. And sometimes love does return. Sometimes families find their way back to one another. Sometimes relationships can be repaired. Sometimes broken connections can become strong again. But someone must take the first step. Someone must choose love over pride, understanding over resentment, connection over distance. I am grateful that my family found their way back, not because they became perfect. No family is perfect, but because they remembered what truly mattered. Today, our family still faces challenges. People remain busy. Responsibilities still exist. Life continues moving quickly. But something has changed. We are intentional now. We make time. We call. We visit. We stay connected. Not because it is convenient, because it is important. That difference has transformed everything. To every son and daughter watching this, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. If your parents are still alive, call them. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Ask how they are doing. Listen to their stories. Be patient if they repeat themselves. One day, you may wish you could hear those stories one more time. Visit when you can. Take photographs. Create memories. Sit together. Laugh together. Make the effort. Because the effort you make today may become one of the greatest gifts you ever give yourself. And if your relationship with your parents is complicated, remember this: perfection is not required for love. Families are imperfect. People make mistakes. Parents make mistakes. Children make mistakes. But whenever possible, choose grace. Choose understanding. Choose reconciliation. Life is often shorter than we imagine. To every parent watching this, I want to say something too. Do not assume you are forgotten simply because people become distracted. Sometimes the people who love us most become overwhelmed by their own struggles. Sometimes they lose sight of what matters. Sometimes they need reminders. Do not lose hope too quickly. Your life still matters. Your stories still matter. Your wisdom still matters. Your presence still matters. You have spent years giving love to others. Never underestimate the impact that love has had. Even when it is not expressed, it often remains alive inside the hearts of those you raised. And to anyone who feels lonely right now, please remember this: loneliness may be part of your story, but it does not have to be the entire story. New conversations can happen. New connections can form. Old relationships can heal. Hope can return. The future is not always determined by the past. As I finish sharing my story, I find myself looking once again at the family photograph sitting beside my chair, the same photograph that once brought tears to my eyes. Today, it brings gratitude, not because everything turned out perfectly, but because love found its way back home. Perhaps that is the lesson hidden inside this story. Love does not disappear as easily as we fear. Sometimes it becomes buried beneath schedules, responsibilities, stress, and distance. But when people choose to reconnect, when they choose to remember, when they choose to make time, love often reappears stronger than before. And so, if you take only one message from this story, let it be this: do not wait. Do not assume there will always be another opportunity. Do not allow business to steal the relationships that matter most. Call the people you love. Visit the people you love. Tell them what they mean to you. Create memories while you still can. Because one day, all of us will leave behind our homes, our possessions, and our accomplishments. But the love we shared, the kindness we gave, and the time we spent with those we cared about will remain. Those things become our true legacy. And in the end, that legacy is worth more than anything else this world can offer. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you still have someone you love, please don't wait for the perfect moment. Reach out today, because sometimes a simple phone call can change everything. And sometimes that phone call becomes a memory that lasts forever. The end.